Greetings to all. I'm Dr. William Lester, the founder of and voice behind Blackwater Media. It's a true pleasure to welcome you all here. I hope that you enjoy this unusual assortment of monsters, aliens, and other strange things that creep, crawl, and lurk by night. Blackwater Media presents the Shadowland radio show Anthology 5.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
The term swamp monster conjures up different images in different people. Thoughts would range from the skunk ape said to roam the Florida Everglades to the reptilian lizard man that allegedly haunts the swamps of Lee County, South Carolina. Still others, without a doubt, think of the terrifying images of the Sasquatch-like creature dubbed the Falk Monster that terrified so many back in the 1970s. When the legend of Boggy Creek made its debut on the big screen. But for me, and perhaps even a few of you, the first thing that comes to mind is the fictional Paramount Fae that was featured in an episode of the 1970 series Kolchak, the Night Stalker. The Paramount Fae was, according to the episode entitled The Spanish Moss Murders, a legendary swamp monster that was humanoid in shape, but much larger and more powerful than any person. It was covered in Spanish moss and decaying vegetation. Paramount Fae squeezed the very life out of its victims by enveloping them in a bear hug that crushed their chest cavities. The show portrayed the Paramount Fae as part of Cajun lore, a legendary creature that parents frighten their children with when they fail to behave. The creature was all but invulnerable and could only be killed by a spear fashioned from the wood of a gum tree. The climactic battle between Kolchak, played brilliantly by Darren McGavin, and the swamp monster in the sewers below Chicago, made quite an impression on a then 8-year-old future cryptid enthusiast. I wondered, years after viewing this episode, if Paramount Fae was based on an actual Cajun legend. Over the years, I became quite well acquainted with Cajun culture. I've heard a lot of interesting tales from some old Cajuns. One has to be careful, as these old-timers are notorious yarn spinners and don't mind polishing up a good story just a bit if it helps achieve the desired effect. Even so, I never heard anyone mention Paramount Fae. I've looked often, but have never found anything on this monster that connects it to anything but the old television show. It appears that Paramount Fae was purely the creation of the Kolchak the Night Stalker writing team. Having said that, it's entirely possible that the writers took some well-known Cajun folk tales and weaved elements of them together to yield the ultimate swamp monster that was Paramount Fae. It is those tales that I would like to examine now, here, with you. One of the most prominent figures in Cajun folklore is that of the rougarou. The term is no doubt derived from the original French term loup-garou. Both of these terms are used interchangeably in French Louisiana. I heard the term loup-garou more often, but noticed even as a young boy that when the old-timers told tales of the beast, they used the term rougarou. The rougarou legend has been around for generations and likely migrated south with the French Canadians 200 years ago. The rougarou is, for all intents and purposes, a werewolf It was described in the past as a beast with the body of a man and the head of a wolf. However, the monster is described most often these days as a shape-shifting human that can transform into a massive wolf-like creature during the full moon. The Rougarou is said to inhabit the swamps, marshes, and bayous of Louisiana, and mindlessly slaughters any living thing unfortunate enough to cross its path. The tale, as is the case with most all boogeyman stories, is most often told around campfires and or to encourage obedience in children. One interesting twist on the Rougarou legend is that the beast will actually hunt down Catholics who fail to observe the rules of Lent. Some versions of the legend actually claim that one way a person can be cursed to become a Rougarou is by breaking the rules of Lent for 7 consecutive years. Now, most would consider the Rougarou or loup-garou as just another legend, a myth and nothing more. After all, there is no real physical evidence to support the existence of such a fantastic creature. Or is there? Back in 1996, the DeQuincy News printed a rather unusual story. It tells of a woman named Barbara Mullins who stumbled across something very unusual on the side of a rural Louisiana state highway. Mullins was driving down Louisiana State Highway 12 when she noticed what appeared to be the road-killed carcass of a large animal at the edge of the road's paved surface. She decided to stop and have a look. What she saw amazed her. She described the animal as being roughly equivalent in size to an adult St. Bernard. The beast was covered with a thick, matted coat of reddish-brown hair. What really stood out to Mullins was the overall simian appearance of the animal. This didn't look like any sort of dog that she'd ever seen. The snout was more like what one would see on a baboon than a dog. The ears of the animal were small and pointy, not dog-like at all. The feature that stood out more than any, however, was the very unpaw-like feet of the creature. They were long and elongated, and looked much more like the feet of an ape than those of any canine. Mullins, unlike so many people who've had strange encounters, had a camera in the car and took several intriguing photos. I have to admit that the photos of the DeRitter roadkill, as the carcass became known, are very interesting. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries wasted little time before stating that the animal was nothing more than a Pomeranian dog. Others felt, due to the simian-like features present, that the animal was some sort of primate. Some ventured this was physical evidence proving the existence of none other than the legendary Rougarou or loup-garou. Whatever the animal might have been will likely never be known. Even the photos themselves, intriguing as they are frustrating in that there's nothing in them that provides scale and thus verify the claim that the animal was the size of a St. Bernard. Was it just a Pomeranian dog that had gone feral or something more? Is this the real creature behind the tales of the Rougarou or the loup-garou? Of all of the swamp monster legends, that of the Honey Island swamp monster might be the most intriguing. The Honey Island swamp is a tract of bottomland lying between the East Pearl and West Pearl rivers in southeast Louisiana. The swamp covers about 250 square miles. Of that, approximately 70,000 acres has been set aside as a protected wildlife area by the Nature Conservancy. The swamp teems with life. Alligators, cougars, coyotes, waterfowl of all kinds, bald eagles, and even the endangered red wolf have all been spotted there. Some claim something else has been seen as well. The first heavily publicized sighting of what will become known as the Honey Island swamp monster took place in 1963 when a retired air traffic controller named Harlan Ford claimed to have spotted the creature while fishing the black waters of the Pearl. Ford and a friend named Bill Mills later brought back casting of a very unusual footprint. The footprint was very large and featured 3 webbed and clawed toes. I thought strongly that this print was nothing more than a very large bull alligator, but it isn't this casting that makes me pause and consider the possibility that a monster might actually roam the Honey Island swamp. Rather, it is the words of Harlan Ford and another local named Ted Williams, of course not the baseball player, spoken during several interviews, and a piece of film that make me think that there might be something to the legend. Williams told the television crew of the famous In Search Of series, hosted by the legendary Leonard Nimoy, the following. First time I ever saw it, it was standing plumb still like a stump. I stopped and realized it wasn't a stump and it wasn't supposed to be there. When I stopped, it ran. It was dark gray, about 7 foot high. It jumped a bayou. That was the first time I saw it. The next time I seen him was swimming near the river, the Pearl River. 2 of them. One was bigger than the other and faster than the other, and they swam just like a human, with long overhead strokes. I tried to get one of them to look at me, and the other one ran off, and the other wouldn't look at me at all. I could have shot it, but I wouldn't on account it wouldn't even look at me. It looked too much like a human to me. Broad shoulders, arms hanging down below its knees and hands. It looked almost like a human. One of the things Williams says during his interview that catches my attention is his description of how the creature stood dead still, like a stump, until it realized it had been seen. Once it realized it had been spotted, the animal fled. This scenario has been described many times by alleged Sasquatch witnesses. The creature in question is clearly a Sasquatch-like animal. Another intriguing aspect of his second account is of the creature's swimming. There have been a handful of Sasquatch sightings where the witnesses claim to have seen these animals swimming. These reports were often dismissed at the time since it was believed that no apes could swim. This has now been proven wrong. The claim of seeing a wood ape swim would have been deemed too outlandish to be believed back in the early 1970s, even by those who believed in the existence of such creatures. Why would Ford and Williams say something they knew even monster hunters wouldn't believe? Ford is also among the first to mention the possibility that the creature might climb trees to escape detection. I've seen a copy of the Honey Island Swamp Monster DVD, a documentary produced by Harlan's daughter, in which another man recounted a sighting to Ford. In a nutshell, the man said that he saw the beast, and then it just disappeared. The man couldn't believe that the animal could have gotten very far in the time it took him to get to the spot where it had first been seen. And Ford asked him, "Did you look up?" Never forget to look up. It's little tidbits like these that lend credence to the stories of Harlan Ford. After Harlan Ford died in 1980, a reel of Super 8 film was found among his belongings. A segment of the film featured an upright creature walking right to left just inside a tree line somewhere in the swamp. His footage is one of only 3 pieces of video that I've seen that I believe may very well be authentic. Some dismiss the video as a hoax, and I don't. And I have reasons for feeling the way I do. Wouldn't Harlan Ford, assuming he was a hoaxer after fame, money, or attention, have promoted his 8mm film for all it was worth? Wouldn't he have gotten it out there to television producers, newspaper and magazine editors, or even local news stations? Why would he hold on to the footage and show no one? It doesn't make sense. Some might think Ford did have plans for the footage and died before those plans could be brought to fruition. I don't buy it, though. I have no idea why Ford never shared the footage. Maybe he had simply achieved his goal of proving the monster was real. Maybe that was enough for him. As stated previously, the creature described by Ford and others in the Honey Island swamp is clearly a Sasquatch-like animal. It's almost universally said to be close to 7 feet tall, covered in hair and bipedal. The colors described range from a grayish hue to the more typical reddish brown. To bring this thing full circle, could the legends of the Lougarou or Rougarou be based on sightings of Sasquatches? The descriptions of the beasts are similar in many ways. Large, upright, covered in hair or fur, etc. Maybe the old Acadians that first settled those bottomlands were projecting their previous knowledge of the French werewolf to the unknown animal they were seeing in the woods near their new homes in the deep south. It is an intriguing theory. Tales of hair-covered, screaming, shambling bipedal swamp monsters aren't going anywhere. Popular culture revels in these sort of things. Bigfoot is used to sell everything from beef jerky to cosmetics. The Swamp Thing of DC Comics and Man Thing of Marvel Comics both play off the swamp monster mythos to sell comic books. Even in Survivor Man, Les Stroud alluded to swamp monsters when he did an episode of his show from the Okefenokee Swamp of southern Georgia several years back. The movie industry will no doubt continue to churn out B-grade films featuring beasts that emerge from the creepy bayous and swamps to terrorize those who dare venture into their territory. Usually scantily clad co-eds, it seems. Quietly, however, among all the noise about these monsters made by popular culture, compelling reports continue to trickle in from normal people who encounter something strange while hunting, camping, fishing, and or hiking in the bottomlands of the South. The Père Maffei of Night Stalker fame may have been a figment of some writer's imagination, but real-life swamp monsters might not be. Think about that the next time you venture into the bottomlands, and realize that there are more strange things under heaven and on the earth than we can possibly imagine. The Grafton Monster, one of the most captivating cryptids, is a headless bipedal humanoid that has intrigued Grafton, West Virginia residents for decades. Sightings of this elusive creature have left witnesses both fascinated and terrified. But what is the truth behind its existence? Is it an extraterrestrial visitor or a result of genetic anomalies caused by unique environmental conditions? Some suggest it may be a product of collective imagination and misidentification. Most reports describe the Grafton Monster as a large, disgusting-looking bipedal humanoid with no visible head. However, it is uncertain whether it truly lacks a head or if its head is simply positioned out of sight closer to its rib cage. The abhorrent-looking cryptid is said to be covered in smooth white fur that is reminiscent of a seal pelt but dingy and sickly-looking. According to an anonymous teenager cited in a 1964 article from the Grafton Sentinel, the monster of Grafton stands at a towering height of over 9 feet and is approximately 4 feet wide, not including its arms. It's also reported that the monster's long, sinewy arms dangle and sway as it moves, adding to its eerie presence. Witnesses claim the creature makes a haunting whistle-like sound and emits a repulsive odor of death and decay. The dwelling place of the Grafton Monster remains a subject of speculation and mystery, as its elusive lair has yet to be definitively discovered. According to local legends and eyewitness accounts, the creature is believed to inhabit the deep recesses of the dense woodlands surrounding the town of Grafton. Most sightings of the creature have been reported along the western banks of the Tygart River, leading most to believe that this is where the monster lives. Within this untamed expanse, the monster is said to roam amidst the labyrinthine network of ancient trees, serene rivers, and shadowed thickets. The first sighting of the Grafton Monster was in 1964 by a man named Robert Cockrell. But days after he saw the creature and word got out, groups of roaming teenagers begin to actively hunt the creature, leading to a large number of additional sightings. Since then, the sightings have been few and far between, but many believe the monster is real and still out there.
Count Yorga Vampire is a horror-haunted tale that will take you beyond the boundaries of shock, past the threshold of fear, into a world of the almost human.
Vampires have always fascinated me.
They should. Their intelligence is far superior to humans.
Is it true that vampires must be in their resting places before the sun rises? That if the rays of the sun hit them, they will disintegrate?
In Count Yorga Vampire, she-creatures of unspeakable cravings become the mistresses of the Death Master, Count Yorga. No, this film is not of centuries past. It is a film of today. It could happen to you. Perhaps it is already happening to someone you know. Today's young people find it fascinating to dabble in the supernatural, and now they and their ladies pay the penalty in Count Yorga Vampire. See Count Yorga Vampire, rated GP. Parental guidance suggested.
To a hunter alone in the woods at twilight, the long black being might seem like another person from afar. But by the time they realize their mistake, it's much too late. Choctaw legend describes this creature, also called Nalosa, as having a humanoid body, a shriveled face, small eyes, and long pointed ears. It allegedly lives in the depths of the woods, usually near a swamp, where it waits for unsuspecting hunters to cross its path. Once someone wanders by, it patiently stalks them, hovering along the trail. Sometimes the long black being is said to call out, mimicking human voices. Other times, they've described as springing across the hunter's path. On either occasion, the hunter is faced with a sight so frightening that they will likely lose consciousness. And that's when the long black being strikes. As the hunter lies unconscious on the ground, the long black being swoops down and pricks the victim with a thorn or a quill. When the hunter awakes, it's probably with a degree of relief. They have no idea that the long black being has bewitched them. At first, the hunter will seem only unusually grumpy, but their bad mood will intensify and become violent. As the long black being's spell takes over, they'll feel compelled to kill everyone close to them. The long black being is also described as bringing death to the Choctaw tribe. In one account, a Choctaw doctor described seeing a long black being walk down a hill through a churchyard. Soon afterward, a terrible flu struck the Choctaw people, killing many. Though nefarious, the long black being is said to have a family of its own. Legend states that the children of the long black being can remove their internal organs and drift through the air. They're allegedly found along the edges of marshes. And then there are the stick people. Like skinwalkers, stick people are so feared that most Native Americans who believe in them won't even speak their names. Out of fear of conjuring or insulting them, these forest spirits are instead referred to as stick people, or sometimes stick Indians. Numerous tribes have stories about stick people. The Salish describe them as Bigfoot-like beasts. The Nez Perce say that they're more like little people. And some tribes say that they appear almost human. But all agree, the stick people are hot-tempered and mischievous. Their stick nickname possibly comes from the joy they derive from poking sticks in teepees. Said to roam the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, the stick people are usually spotted at night. They're often seen snatching fish from nets, nabbing clothes from men, and stealing food. But be warned, trying to stop or hinder these forest spirits can be deadly. Infamously vindictive, legend states that it doesn't take much to set them off. They can drive people insane, kidnap them, or simply devour them. Stick people can be hard to avoid, however, because they are also said to shapeshift. These roguish and dangerous spirits can easily take on the appearance of a wild animal. Often, they'll even lure people into the woods by mimicking animals or whistling. Of all their abilities, the stick people's desire to seek revenge is their most defining feature. No matter how small the slight, they will bear a grudge. Africa, the birthplace of mankind and, of course, civilization itself. It is a continent steeped in history, tradition, remembered and forgotten knowledge, magic, and sometimes even monsters. First is the Groot slang, a name meaning big snake, and it refers to a cryptid which lives in a deep cave down in Richtersveld in South Africa, also known as the Great Snake of the Orange River. This creature can also be found in swamps and freshwater sources. According to the South African legend, this creature is as old as the world we live in, and its story starts at creation. It is said that as the gods created the world, they created this creature. However, they made a mistake in making the Groot slang, and they gave it way too much intellect and strength. Having realized their mistake, the gods began creating other creatures out of the Groot slang to minimize their strength. One of the Groot slangs escaped and gave rise to other animals of its kind. The Groot slang can lure elephants to its cave where it devours them. This cave is said to connect to the sea and is full of valuable gems. The Groot slang's love for treasure is so overwhelming that locals believe that victims can buy their way out of getting devoured by offering it diamonds. The Ajul, also known as the bush dog, is a cryptid canine believed to be a phantom with the ability to take the form of a dog or a wolf. It is said to stand at 2.5 feet, and its coat is crimson with a blue tint. Strangely, the creature also has webbed feet. Locals claim that the creature uses pheromones to cause discord among its prey to make hunting easier. These creatures are said to be found in arid regions, and they hunt in packs. The dingoneck is believed to live in the Congolese jungles and found in rivers and lakes. It measures 3 to 6 meters in length and has a square head. The tail of the dingoneck is said to contain poison which it secretes to weaken its prey. This scaly creature is very territorial, and it will kill anything that wanders into its habitat, including fishermen. Jabba Fofi, also known as the giant spider, is believed to be a new kind of arachnid which inhabits the Congo forests. The Baka, who are indigenous to the Congo, say that the creature can spin a web between 2 trees which it uses to capture animals such as birds and small game. The creatures are said to be strong enough to overpower humans. Other areas where such a creature has been seen include Vietnam, Zimbabwe, and Uganda. The Agagwe, also known as the Kukundakari or Kalomba in Zimbabwe and the Congo, is a human-like creature spotted in the forests and jungles of East Africa. The first known sighting by a white man occurred in 1900 by Captain William Hitchens, but was reported 37 years later in the December issue of the Discovery magazine. It usually stands from 2 to 5 feet tall with several human features. The creature is also said to have odd characteristics such as long arms and rusty-colored hair covering its body, with yellowish red skin under its coat. Sometimes it's described as copper. Its feet are roughly 12 centimeters long, The differences between the Agagwe and a modern chimpanzee is that the Agagwe have a rounded forehead, smaller but sharper teeth, and different hair and skin color. The Nkenyamba is a legendary serpent that dwells at the base of the Howick Falls in South Africa and is believed to have the head of a horse. It's mainly active during the warm seasons, and locals claim that when angered, the creature can stir up a storm. The creature is said to be over 20 feet long. Mamlambo is a creature that appears in South African and Zulu folklore, known to the natives as the brain sucker. This quasi-reptilian monstrosity terrorized the villages around the Mtslava River in South Africa, and was notorious for dragging its victims into its murky depths, where it would devour their faces in order to consume their brains. These animals have been described by eyewitnesses as being an astounding 6 to 7 feet in length. Other descriptions include a long tail, 4 stubby legs, a crocodilian torso, a serpentine neck, and a horse-like head. It's even been suggested that this animal may be bioluminescent. These are just a few of the cryptids that have been reported in Africa down through the decades, and even centuries. But who knows what secrets await there? There are still places in Africa, including the Congo Basin, with 3.7 million acres that are largely unexplored. Knowing that, it is quite possible that the land once known as the Dark Continent holds more secrets that can ever be imagined.
At the edge of the universe, 400 men and women are probing the immeasurable blackness of space. Their leaders are an Earthman with no fear and a stranger with no heart. Travel beyond our time and solar system, into new galaxies, into worlds beyond your dreams. Star Trek, every week, in color on the NBC television network.
Within the folklore of the Ashanti people in Ghana's Gold Coast region, a figure emerges. A witch wielding powers to absorb the lives and energy of others. Known as the Obeifu, this entity is believed to be an innate predisposition at birth, incapable of being passed on to others. Despite being considered human, the Obeifu's true nature remains concealed unless attacked in the presence of others, as they emit phosphorescence when faced with a threat. Practitioners of this form of witchcraft are recognized by their furtive glances and an unusual fixation on food. It is said that they possess the ability to emit phosphorescent light from their anus and armpits while in motion. These individuals share similarities with the Asiman, known for their shape-shifting flying capabilities and nocturnal hunting prowess. Within the Ashanti region, those engaging in the practice of witchcraft known as Bayi are commonly identified as Obeifu. However, this term encompasses both practitioners of this craft and those who transform into monstrous entities. The differentiation lies in gender, with Obeifu exclusively denoting men practicing witchcraft, while the term is ascribed to women who transform into monsters. The phosphorescent nature of Obeifu has led to beliefs connecting them to African vampire shamans. Although it's commonly referred to as a vampire, the Obeifu differs from the European version of this creature. It's regarded as an evil witch who feeds off the despair and fear of people. This witch is known by other names: Asanbosam, Obeifu, and Asiman. Driven by an insatiable appetite, the witch departs her physical form at night as the Obeifu takes flight in search of prey, often targeting children and crops. The cacao tree, a key ingredient in chocolate, holds a particular allure for her. The extraction of a person's life energy is a prolonged process, sometimes spanning several days before the unfortunate victim succumbs. Consuming a mystical elixir crafted from vegetable and fruit juices empowers the Obiifu to morph into diverse animal shapes, leveraging these forms to carry out lethal attacks on unsuspecting individuals. In certain regions of Ghana, the ancient tradition of venerating traditional gods and spirits persists, facilitated by the guidance of a shaman. While the Obiifu is distinct from a zombie, being a living being animated by an evil spirit, its presence can be elusive within the tight-knit community it inhabits. Only a white wizard shaman, or Okamfo, is believed to possess the discernment to effectively communicate with and direct the Obiifu. The Okamfu is revered as the sole safeguard against the malevolent influence of the witch. In Indian lore, Vitala is a type of ghoul or vampire haunting cemeteries and reanimating the dead. Corpses may be used as vehicles for movement, as they no longer decay while so inhabited, though at night, Vitala may also leave the body in order to feed. Vitala are hostile spirits of the dead whose offspring did not perform funerary rites in their memory. As a result, they are trapped in the twilight zone between life and afterlife. These creatures can be appeased with gifts or frightened away with spells. Performing properly the funerary rites mean getting rid of these evil spirits. The Vitala has a demonic appearance. Their image strikes terror in all who lay eyes upon them. One particularly frightening feature is that victims reanimated by Vitala have their hands and feet pointed backwards. Being spirits unfettered by the laws of space and time, they have an uncanny knowledge about the past, present, and future, and a deep insight into human nature. Hence, many sorcerers seek to capture them and turn them into slaves. They make their displeasure known by troubling humans, by causing madness, causing miscarriages, and most horribly, killing children. On July 19, 1972, a 20-man search party was organized in the small town of Louisiana, Missouri, to track down a huge, black, hairy beast that was being reported by local residents. Louisiana's police chief Shelby Ward was afraid that nervous residents would start shooting the monster and hit a local by mistake. The media whipped up the frenzy about the monster, and the quiet, unassuming community was launched into the national spotlight. The press humorously dubbed the reportedly foul-smelling creature Momo, which stood for the Missouri Monster. But local residents found the frightening encounters anything but funny. The Missouri Monster Scare actually began on July 11, 1972. The first encounter with the creature occurred on the outskirts of Louisiana, at the base of Marzolf Hill. An 8-year-old boy named Terry Harrison and his brother Wiley, age 5, were playing with their dog in the woods at the edge of their yard. Suddenly, an older sister, Doris, 15, who was inside of the house, heard them screaming. She ran to look out of the bathroom window and saw something standing by a tree. It was 6 or 7 feet tall, black and hairy, she said. It stood like a man, but it didn't look like one to me. She began crying and ran into the other room to call her mother on the telephone. Both Doris and Terry got a good look at the monster and agreed that its face could not be seen because of the mass of hair that covered its body. The creature seemed to have no neck, and it was flecked with blood, likely from the dead dog that it was carrying under its arm. The smell of the creature was said to have been horrendous, and it may have been this odor that made the Harrison's dog violently sick a short time after the incident. The dog's eyes grew red, and it vomited for hours afterward. At 4 p.m., Edgar Harrison, the children's father, and a deacon in the local Pentecostal church returned home from his job at the town waterworks. He found no monster, but he did find that the brush was beaten down where the children said that the creature had been standing. He also found a few faint footprints in the dust and a few black hairs scattered about. That same afternoon, a woman who lived about 3 blocks away from the Harrisons, Mrs. Clarence Lee, reported that she heard animal sounds outside her home. Not long afterwards, she allegedly spoke with a local farmer whose dog had disappeared. Remembering the Harrisons' children's report, she wondered if the monster had taken it. On July 14th, Edgar Harrison was conducting a regular prayer meeting at his home, and soon after it ended, heard clanging sounds like someone was throwing rocks into the metal water reservoir on the top of Marzoff Hill. The reservoir was an attraction for neighborhood children, but it was unlikely that any of them would have been playing there at that hour. As he listened closely to the sounds, he heard one especially loud ring and then an animal-like growl. The sound came closer and closer and was so loud that his family came running out of the house. They urged him to leave the neighborhood, but Harrison wanted to see what was making the sound. Finally, he agreed to leave, and as he drove down Allen Street, he met about 40 people, some of them carrying guns, who were on their way to investigate the sounds at the reservoir. For some reason, Harrison shouted, "Here it comes!" and the entire crowd turned away and ran. A number of people reported hearing the strange cries and screams that night, but by the time the police officers Jerry Floyd and John Whitaker arrived on the scene to investigate, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The creature continued to be seen in the days that followed, leading to Chief Ward's, quote, monster hunt on July 19th. The posse included Edgar Harrison and State Conservation Officer Gus Artis, and they covered Marzoff Hill and the surrounding area using two-way radios, but found nothing. While it was taking place, residents reported animal sounds in other parts of town. On July 20th, more investigators joined the search and again combed the area behind the Harrison house and all along Marzoff Hill. They found trampled brush, signs of digging, and large tracks that were more than 10 inches long. Handprints were found pressed into the dry, hard soil, which investigators were convinced it would have taken immense pressure to make. They also smelled the beast, believing that it was close, but saw nothing. On July 21st, the monster was seen again, this time on the Great River Road, which runs along the Mississippi River. Ellis Minor, who lived on the road, was sitting in front of his home late in the evening. It was very dark, and suddenly his bird dog began to growl. Minor switched on a powerful flashlight that he used for hunting, and he spotted the monster about 20 feet away from him, standing in the middle of the road. He later told reporters that it had hair as black as coal, and that he could not see its face because the hair on its head hung down to its chest. As soon as I threw the light on it, he recalled, it whirled and took off that way. He did not report the sighting to the police, but he did call Gus Artis, the local conservation officer. By now, national publicity was turning Louisiana into a three-ring circus. People were driving in from surrounding states, hoping to get a look at the creature. Edgar Harrison had become obsessed with finding a solution to the monster mystery. His family refused to come home again, taking up residence in a restaurant the family owned, and so his house was turned into a monster outpost. The phones rang constantly. Meanwhile, Harrison had taken a leave of absence from his job at the waterworks to hunt the monster full time. In the company of friends and investigators, he camped out at the foot of Marzoff Hill for 21 straight nights. And while he never saw the monster, he did hear and smell it, and noted that whenever the searchers were onto something, they were overwhelmed by the terrible smell. During the last week of July and into the early days of August, more prints were found south of town. More tracks were discovered on the early morning of August 3rd at the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Bill Sutterth, who lived just northwest of town. In the middle of the night, they heard high-pitched howling in their yard and ran outside with flashlights to see what was going on. In the middle of their garden, they found 4 large prints. Sudduth quickly called his hunting buddy, Clyde Penrod, who drove over and made a plaster cast of the print. Penrod, who was an avid outdoorsman, was puzzled by the whole affair. With the tracks being 20 feet away from anything else, he couldn't understand how they could have been made. They began abruptly in the center of the garden and ended just as mysteriously. It looked as if the creature had just appeared in the center of the garden and then vanished. No tracks were found anywhere else on the property, and there was no sign that any prankster could have made them either. This was to be the last encounter with the creature, and perhaps it is fitting that the monster flap ended on such an inexplicable note. The discovery of the strange tracks at the Sudduth farm ended the Momo sightings and encounters in Louisiana, and the story has become little more than a remembered curiosity in the area today. There are some, though, who are likely to never forget the summer of 1972. For those people, and for those with an interest in the unexplained, those days in July will always remain a mystery.
Who can have done this evil thing?
Only one man.
I'm not beaten yet.
Baron Frankenstein is back.
I prove my theory.
I think you have found the true secret of life.
It's not human. It's a monster.
The work.
Now do you believe me? He'll understand you, all right. He just won't obey you.
Peter Cushing, the evil of Frankenstein. Tonight at 8, 5 Pacific.
You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. Near the mouth of the Altamaha River in southeastern Georgia is said to reside a hissing sea monster. Called Altamaha for the river, or Alti for short. The legend predates British-English colonization and is said to have originated with the lower Muskogee Creek tribe. One of the largest rivers in the state of Georgia, it empties into the Atlantic Ocean and is one of the largest river basins in the country, second only to the Mississippi River. Extending about 137 miles, it joins up with three major tributaries, that of the Ocmulgee and Oconee rivers near Lumberton City, and joined further downriver by the Ohoopee River. It empties out into Altamaha Sound above Brunswick, where it is joined by the Darien, Butler, and Champney rivers before making its way to the ocean. The river area, located primarily in McIntosh and Glenn counties along the Atlantic coast, is not comprised of beaches, but rather is made up of many islands, acres of marshes, dikes, canals, ponds, and old rice fields. The creature is said to inhabit the myriad of small streams and twisting channels of the river and adjacent marshes, particularly around Darien, Butler Island, and elsewhere in McIntosh County. This strange cryptid is described as having a sturgeon-like body, including a bony ridge on its top, with front flippers and no back limbs. It swims like a dolphin and has the snout of a crocodile with large protruding eyes and large sharp teeth. Its coloring is said to be gray or green with a whitish yellow underbelly. Reports indicate that it is 20 to 30 feet long, though some have stated seeing smaller or larger creatures, suggesting that it's not alone. It has reportedly been seen basking itself on the shore, trolling casually along the river, and has even reacted defensively while in the presence of boaters. Though no physical evidence of the creature has been found, the tales date back for centuries, with the Indians describing a giant snake-like creature that hissed and bellowed. One of the first non-native reports of the creature was on April 18, 1830, when a correspondent of the Savannah, Georgia newspaper reported multiple sightings of a sea monster on the Georgia coast. The primary eyewitness was Captain Delano of the schooner Eagle, who reported seeing a large creature off St. Simon's Island below the mouth of the Altamaha River. His description stated that it was about 70 feet long, its circumference about the size of a barrel, and its head that of an alligator. 5 other men on the schooner also reported having seen the monster, as well as several planters on St. Simon's Island. In the 1920s, timbermen riding the river reported sighting a large snake-like water monster, and in 1935 a group of hunters spotted what they called a giant snake swim through the river. In the 1940s, Boy Scouts reported seeing the creature, as well as 2 officials from the Reedsville State Prison from the 1950s. In 1969, when 2 brothers were fishing on the Altamaha River at Clark's Bluff, they reported seeing an animal that they first thought was a sturgeon, but quickly changed their minds when they got a better look. They stated that it measured about 10 to 12 feet long, with a snout like an alligator, and a horizontal tail. They also described the creature as having a triangular ridge along the top of its body, sharp pointed teeth, and being gunmetal gray in color. In the summer of 1980, 2 men reportedly saw the creature stranded on a mud bank near Cathead Creek. They reported that the animal was lying halfway in the water, thrashing and trying to free itself from the bank. They described it as being dark-colored with rough skin and about 20 feet long. While watching, the creature freed itself, submerged, and disappeared. Later that year, in December of 1980, another man reported having seen what he thought was the creature in Smith Lake. He said that the animal was 15 to 20 feet long, snake-like, with 2 brown humps that protruded from the water and left behind a wake like that of a speedboat. Another report in the 1980s, described by a crab fisherman, stated that the creature looked like the world's biggest eel. A sighting was reported in 2002 by a man pulling a boat up the river near Brunswick who reported seeing something over 20 feet in length and 6 feet wide break the water. In 2010, an amateur photographer captured a video of something strange swimming in the channel off the Fort King George Historic Site in Darien. Sightings of the creature continue to this day. So, do strange, unknown aquatic cryptids inhabit the Altamaha River in Georgia? Years, decades, even centuries of testimony seem to say so. I'll leave the rest to your judgment. For 5 nights in the autumn of 1903, a strange creature with bat-like wings, a horn on its forehead, and a foul smell haunted the small Iowa town of Van Meter, leaving behind footprints and terrified witnesses. At that time, the town's population was just over 400, and none of them had any idea about the terror to come. The Van Meter visitor was first sighted on September 29, 1903, by Ulysses Griffith, a local doctor. He was awakened by a bright light shining into his bedroom window. He grabbed his shotgun and went outside to investigate. He saw a large creature perched on a telephone pole, emitting a beam of light from its horn. He fired at it, but it seemed unaffected and flew away. The next night, another witness, O.V. White, a hardware store owner, had a similar encounter. He heard a noise outside his store and saw the same creature on the roof. He also shot at it, but it flew away with a loud screech. The following night, Sidney Gregg, a banker, was returning home from work when he saw the creature in an alley. It jumped on him and knocked him down. He described it as having smooth skin, large eyes, and a blunt nose. He managed to escape and ran to his house. On October 2nd, several townspeople decided to track down the creature and put an end to its reign of terror. They followed it to an old coal mine on the outskirts of town. There they discovered not one, but 2 of the creatures. One was larger than the other and seemed to be guarding it. The townspeople opened fire on them, but they retreated into the mine shaft. The next morning, the townspeople gathered at the mine entrance, expecting to see the creatures emerge, but they never did. The mine was sealed off, and the Van Meter visitor was never seen again. What was the Van Meter visitor? It was 1903, and the concept of hoax is all but ludicrous. So too, I dare say, is the suggestion of some kind of community hallucination. While no one knows for sure, some have speculated that it was a misidentified bird, bat, or pterosaur. Such theories may deserve some consideration, but in my view, under scrutiny, fall by the wayside rather quickly. Others have suggested that the antediluvian interloper was an alien or an interdimensional being. Some have even claimed that it was a manifestation of collective fear or subconscious guilt. Whatever it was, the Van Meter monster has become a proverbial fixture in the realm of Fortean studies. Perhaps more importantly, it forces us to wonder, what else might be out there lurking in the dark?
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing with me. Perfect harmony, perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a home and keep it company.
Driving down a dark rural road in the middle of the night, your imagination is bound to get a little wild. Spotting eyes in the bushes, conjuring figures in the shadows between trees, or even feeling like you're being watched are all understandable reactions to a spooky atmosphere. But what happens when an overactive imagination isn't enough to explain the bizarre creature staring out at you from the dark? The town of Dover, Massachusetts is a relatively quiet and peaceful community. But for 1 week in 1977, a rash of unusual creature sightings sent the local area into a flurry of confusion and curiosity. Was there a demon in their midst? The first sighting occurred on April 21st, 1977, by 3 17-year-old boys who were driving through the Massachusetts area when the car's headlights illuminated it. Bill Bartlett, the driver, reported that he saw what he thought at first was a dog or a cat, but upon closer inspection, realized that it was a bizarre, unearthly-looking creature crawling along a stone wall on Farm Street. Bartlett continued to watch the creature, and he reported it to have a disproportionately large watermelon-shaped head and illuminated orange eyes like glass marbles. It had long, thin arms and legs with slender fingers, which it used to grasp onto the pavement. It was hairless and had rough, flesh-toned skin described as tan or sandpaper-like. The creature's appearance was very plain, with no nose or ears, and no mouth was seen. The witness drawings portray its head as having a skull shape, forming the contour of a circle on top with a more elliptical ending projecting down to include where the nose and mouth would be. The Dover demon was also thought to become invisible or translucent in the night. By day, it hid deep in the forests of Dover, Massachusetts. Other witnesses have claimed the creature had green eyes and seemingly smooth, chalky, gray-toned skin, 3 feet tall, and made a blood-curdling noise similar to a hawk's screech combined with a snake's hiss. But all witnesses say it had no ears, no mouth, nose, or known gender. Witnesses also agree that it stalks in the trees and waits to scare its next victim. The creature was sighted again an hour later by John Baxter, 15, and Pete Mitchell, 13, as they were walking home. He said it was bipedal and ended up running into a gully and standing next to a tree. The next day, Abby Brabham, 15, and Will Trainter, 18, claimed to have seen a similar-looking creature from Trainter's car on the side of the road. Brabham's description matched Bartlett's and Baxter's descriptions, except this time, the cryptid had illuminated green eyes. She approximated its height as about the size of a goat. Investigators attempted to shake up Mrs. Brabham by noting she said it had green eyes reflected by car headlights, while Bartlett mentioned orange eyes being reflected back to him by his automobile's lights. Nonetheless, Miss Brabham was steadfast in her description. Bartlett, Baxter, Brabham, and Trainter all drew sketches of the monstrous sight shortly after their sightings. On the piece of paper that includes Bartlett's sketch, he wrote, quote, "I, Bill Bartlett, swear on a stack of Bibles that I saw this creature." By this time, the story had attracted national attention. Many people wrote the whole thing off as a coordinated hoax, but there was no indication at the time that any of the witnesses knew what the others were reporting. Another somewhat unusual theory is that the sightings were actually of a young moose calf, which would have a similar gangly appearance and large eyes. However, there were actually no wild moose in Massachusetts at the time. William Bartlett gave an interview to the Boston Globe in 2006, reaffirming the veracity of at least his bizarre sighting. Since that week in 1977, others have also reported encounters with the Dover Demon. But what was it? An extraterrestrial interloper? A bizarre denizen from another dimension? Or the product of some weird, aberrant science experiment? I believe that the witnesses saw exactly what they reported seeing. As for the rest, we may never know. Blandonboro is a small community surrounded by pine forests and swamps at the southeastern edge of the North Carolina Piedmont. It is also the setting for the greatest monster flap North Carolina has ever seen. The story begins in Bladen County, in the town of Clarkton. On December 29, 1953, a local woman heard her neighbor's dogs barking and whimpering. When she went out to investigate, she saw a large, cat-like creature skulk off into the darkness. That was the first sighting of the beast of Blandonboro. 2 days later, the creature would strike. On New Year's Eve, Blandonboro Police Chief Roy Forrest was called out to the farm of Woody Storm. 2 of Storm's dogs had been killed by something large and powerful. The poor dogs' bodies had been completely drained of blood. More reports started coming in. D.G. Pate said he watched from his service station as a dog was attacked by a large creature and dragged into the woods. Chief Forrest was inundated with reports of dogs being attacked from across the county. People said they saw an animal, like a bear or a panther, that was 3 feet long, 20 inches high, with a long tail and a cat's face. Others reported hearing the creature scream coming from the swamps near the town, saying it sounded like a woman with a knife stuck in her back. On January 1st, the bodies of 2 more dogs were discovered. These 2 had been drained of blood. Chief Forrest decided it was time to call for help. A team of professional hunters was brought in from Wilmington to track down the animal. Chief Forrest accompanied the tracking party and said he saw footprints the size of a silver dollar. Then, on January 5th, the beast of Blandonboro attacked a human. That evening, Mrs. C.E. Kinslaw heard the sound of whimpering dogs outside her house. She went outside to investigate. She saw a large cat-like creature rush towards her. Mrs. Kinslaw screamed, and her husband rushed outside. The beast was frightened off and fled back into the woods. Of course, it wasn't too long before newspapers picked up the story, and soon Blandonboro was overwhelmed with a flurry of hunters coming in, eager to bag the beast. Over 600 men from as far away as Tennessee descended on the town. A fully armed pack of fraternity brothers from UNC Chapel Hill made its way down to the town to see about putting the beast's head on their wall. But nobody knew exactly what they were hunting. Speculation began running rampant. Some thought it was a Carolina panther, a species of large cat that had lived in the area until the early 20th century, but was now thought to be extinct. Others said they were dealing with a coyote or stray dog. Most of those who had descended on Bladen County thought that the only way to find out for sure what the beast was would be by killing it. The town was terrified. F. Butler, who was a young man in Blandonboro at the time, recalled, "Nighttime was the feared time around these parts. As the sun set, the entire community on the west side of town went indoors and didn't come out unless necessary." The fear of the beast had a very real effect on Mr. Butler and his family. We didn't live in town limits at that time, and almost everyone had an outdoor bathroom. To supplement the outside convenience, most houses had a thunder jug, a big jug that could be used at night and emptied into the privy during the day. That jug got plenty of use during the scare. Deciding that things were getting too dangerous, Blandonboro Mayor Bob Fussell and Chief Forrest called to an end to the hunt. On January 13th, taking an unusually large bobcat that had been trapped by a local farmer, the two men hung it up in a flagpole in the center of town. They posted a sign underneath stating, "This is the beast of Blandonboro." After about a week or so, things settled back pretty much to normal, although there were strange sightings that continued, and very unusual animal sounds emanating from deep in the swamps. But the hunters left town, and the reports of killing stopped coming in. Whatever the beast of Blandonboro was, it had vanished back into the night and swamps from which it had first emerged.
They came from another planet to destroy the Earth. Giant spiders crushing, clawing, killing, wreaking havoc. There was no place to hide from them. They were everywhere. Could anything stop the giant spider invasion? Beware, the spiders are coming.
Hundreds of cultures worldwide have legends of dangerous mythical demons or beings that locals swear exist, but which science has yet to conclusively document. The chupacabra in Puerto Rico and Latin America, the Yeti of the Himalayas, and the Jersey Devil, well, of course, New Jersey. All of these fall into this category of creatures. Locals blame them for everything from livestock slaughter to human abductions, and despite the lack of proof of their existence, whispers and rumors of their evil deeds keep them alive in the darkest corners of the imagination. In the African country of Tanzania, specifically on the islands of Zanzibar, the demon that haunts the locals' dreams is the Popabawa, the Swahili word for bat wing. The earliest recorded sightings of the Popabawa occurred in 1965 on the island of Pemba, though accounts of the creature popped up more frequently by the early 70s. While this may seem shockingly recent, many mythical creatures have relatively recent origins. The first chupacabra sighting only occurred in 1995. A shapeshifter, the Popabawa is said to take on both human and animal forms at will. It gets its evocative name, however, from the distinctive shadow cast by its outspread wings when it attacks. Many who have had encounters with this creature claim that it is a jinn released by a sheikh seeking vengeance. Unfortunately for those in Zanzibar, the sheikh quickly lost control of his spirit helper, who then turned to evil ways. According to more reports, the Popabawa will creep into your room in the dark of night and attack you in your own bed. Sometimes a sulfurous smell accompanies the creature, and occasionally it is heard on the roof, claw scraping before it enters. But a single Popobawa attack isn't the end of the horror. Tradition has it that if you don't tell others of the attack, the Popobawa will visit you again, staying longer and attacking more violently on each subsequent visit. The creature is said to also be particularly fond of attacking people who don't think that it exists. Since the earliest sightings, several Popobawa panics have broken out, most recently in 2007 in Dar es Salaam, though the panic of 1995 was by far the most widespread. Strangely, the sightings seem to happen in waves. Dozens or hundreds of individuals will report being attacked in a given year. Then the creature flies under the radar, so to speak, essentially unheard of for several years before appearing again. Perhaps the creature is the product of an evil sorcerer, conjured into our reality from some other realm through the process of dark magic. So understand that to many in Tanzania and surrounding environs, the Popobawa is very real. So should you by chance happen to see the outline of dark wings against the night sky, make sure to keep the lights on. An isolated mountainous region of China is apparently the home to strange, gigantic creatures resembling albino toads. In this distant forest-strewn corner of China's Hubei province, there are numerous lakes and deep water-filled gorges. While the beauty and natural splendor of the region is undeniable, there are some who claim that far and away the most interesting thing about this district are the gigantic and viciously territorial toad-like creatures that are said to lurk beneath the unfathomable waters. According to local fishermen, Baofeng Lake and other gorges that dot the region are infested with colossal alabaster-skinned amphibious monsters known as Wunan toads, whose most disturbing attributes are their allegedly voracious appetites. This phenomenon was first brought to national attention in 1962 when a group of terrified fishermen attempted to purge their favorite fishing hole of these beasts by throwing dynamite into their murky domain. The fishermen were not only unsuccessful in their efforts, but were actually chased away from the lake by a massive toad-like menace, which the men, for reasons known only to them, was dubbed Chan. Legend has it that the monstrous Chan pursued the fishermen almost 90 feet beyond the shoreline. The fishermen were understandably reticent to return to the lake, and reports indicate that these pale-skinned monstrosities have continued to plague all those who stray too close to their watery abode. As intriguing as the 1962 episode may be, there's an even more impressive encounter with these unexplained creatures on public record. According to an account printed in the Brisbane, Australia's Courier Mail in 1995, Professor Chin Mok-chun led an expedition of 9 scientists from the Peking University to the remote Wunan area in August of 1987 in order to make a scientific study of the region's fauna. As the scientists began setting up camp along the shores of one of Wunan's remote gorges, 3 gigantic animals reportedly surfaced in the lake and began to swim toward them. The stunned men later described the creatures as being toad-like in appearance, with a pale epidermis and large gaping maws which seemed to exceed a width of 6 feet. The witnesses claimed that the animals' gazes seemed both aggressive and predatory, though these observations are strictly subjective. While these men of science stared in stunned disbelief at the gargantuan beasts that were bearing down on them, one of the creatures suddenly unfurled its gigantic tongue and, before the eyewitnesses could react, lunged forward and snagged one of their camera tripods by its leg and drawing it back into the water. The scientists, of course, watched in awe, and as one might imagine, more than a little terror. The animal proceeded to devour its inanimate prey. As soon as its meal was complete, The expedition members claimed that the remaining animals emitted horrific shrieks before submerging into the depths of the lake and into the annals of the cryptozoological record.
Here's to good friends. Tonight is kind of special. The beer will pour. Must say something more somehow. So tonight, let it be low and brown. Let it be low and brown. It's been so long. Hey, I'm glad to see you. Raise your glass. Here's to health and happiness. So tonight, let it be all the best.
When you're with good friends having good times, don't just have a beer. Have a low and brown. Because good friends and good times deserve the taste of a great beer. And there's really only one. Low and brown.
Tonight, let it be low and brown.
A very peculiar series of events began in February of 1972, when an 11-year-old boy, Colin Robson, and his younger brother Leslie were weeding their parents' garden at their home in Hexham, Northumberland, England, when they unearthed 2 carved stone heads. Both heads were roughly a little smaller than tennis balls and very heavy. They were crudely carved and weathered-looking, one resembling a skull-like masculine head, and the other a slightly smaller female head. The female head supposedly resembled a witch. The heads were cut with hollow eyes and mouth, and a rough protrusion as a nose. Shortly after the boys had taken their heads into their house, a number of peculiar incidents began to occur. The heads would turn around and around all by themselves, and household objects were found inexplicably broken. At one point, one of the daughters of the family living in the house found her bed showered with glass. However, it was the next-door neighbors who experienced the most startling occurrence. A few nights after the discovery of the heads, a mother living in the neighborhood was sitting up late with her daughter who was suffering from a toothache. She and her daughter saw what they described as a half-man, half-beast enter the room. They both screamed, and the husband came running from another room to see what all the commotion was about. By this stage, however, the beast had walked off down the stairs. It could reportedly be heard padding down the stairs as if on its hind legs. The front door was found open, so it was presumed that the creature had left the house that way. Soon after this incident, a doctor who had studied the Celtic culture and had written several books on it took possession of the stone heads to study them. She had several other heads that were similar, and she was certain that the Hexham heads were Celtic and around 1800 years old. The doctor lived in Southampton, about 150 miles from Hexham, and had heard nothing of the strange goings-on encountered by the previous owners of the heads. She put the 2 stone heads with the rest of her collection. A few nights later, she too encountered the mysterious creature. She woke from sleep feeling cold and frightened. She looked up and saw standing in front of the door of the room a horrid creature that was half-man, half-animal-type beast. Her description of the event runs as follows. It was about 6 feet high, slightly stooping, and it was black against the white door, and it was half-animal and half-man. The upper part, I would have said, was a wolf, and the lower part was human, and it was covered with a kind of black or very dark fur. Suddenly the creature disappeared, and something made me run after it, a thing I wouldn't normally have done. I felt compelled to run after it. I got out of the bed, and I ran, and I could hear it going down the stairs, and then it disappeared towards the back of the house. After this, the doctor and her family saw what they described as a huge black creature, like a werewolf, appear a number of times around the house. It particularly appeared a lot on the stairs, where it would always run halfway down the stairs and then jump over the banisters to land in the hall, where it would then run off on padded feet. Sometimes it could be heard padding around, although it couldn't be seen, and sometimes doors would fly open, seemingly for no reason. The doctor stated further that there was an evil presence about the house. Eventually, she decided that the stone heads were the source of the problem and got rid of the whole collection. The 2 Hexam heads passed into the hands of other collectors who experienced no werewolf phenomena. However, some did report that a sense of evil seemed to be emitted by the witch-like head, which made them very uncomfortable. Eventually, the heads became untraceable, and their current whereabouts is unknown. One of the strange additions to the mystery was the claim by the previous owner of the house in Hexam where the heads were discovered that he had in fact made the heads as toys for children in 1956 and that they'd been lost in the garden. According to him, the heads were not Celtic at all, but only around 20 years old when they were found. Apparently, there were a series of tests done on the heads, including examinations at Southampton and Newcastle universities, all of which resulted in a flurry of contradictory explanations, theories, and conjecture. Of course, no one should be surprised that the heads subsequently disappeared and have never been seen again. Therefore, as is so often the case with such things, we are left yet again with another mystery. Aniloko, or in the plural, Biloko, are creatures from the folklore of the Nkundu people of Zaire, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's described as being the returned spirit of an ancestor belonging to those that still live there. Another interesting explanation is that it was once somebody that died an unfortunate death who was unable to move on to the afterlife. It is said to rise from its grave, hideously transformed, appearing as an ugly, diminutive creature that has characteristics of both animal and plant in the form of sharp teeth, snout, long claws, and grass covering its otherwise bald body with a grudge against the living. It dwells in the darkest, densest regions of the rainforest, within the hollows of trees, ferociously and jealously guarding its treasures. Although there are game and rare fruits in the rainforest, Aniloko will prey on unwary travelers, or those foolhardy enough to try and enter its territory. They will hunt using their perfect camouflage and a magical bell which is said to be able to enchant or paralyze a man. To survive, you will need to be an intrepid hunter, because successful hunters need to possess strong magic, without which they would never see game at all. If you are unfortunate enough to succumb to Aniloko's magic, it will devour you whole by dislocating and stretching its jaws wide open to accommodate your entire body. These elusive creatures are dwarf-like in stature, with pot bellies and a snout like that of an animal. Though completely hairless, they grow moss and grass over their short bodies and wear clothing fashioned from leaves and other foliage. They are said to have piercing eyes that glow like fire, viciously sharp claws and jaws that are able to dislocate, similar to a snake, which can stretch wide enough to swallow a human whole, whether dead or alive. In contrast to their grotesque visage, they are said to have gentle voices like that of a child. Unfortunately, the origins of this creature are hard to pinpoint due to a lack of written records. Tribes located in remote regions will often rely on history and superstitions to be passed on via word of mouth. It is clear, however, that the Iloko is deep-rooted in the region's folklore and has existed for generations, if not hundreds of years. However, it is told that the Iloko are the returned and restless spirits of those who once dwelt in the region of the forest, which they now hunt and protect. As they died an unfortunate death, they are unable to move on and instead rise as hideous monsters, moving into the secluded parts of the forest within the hollows of trees and preying on unwary travelers. Hostile and predatory, the Iloko are said to despise the living. They are expert hunters with a natural camouflage and a taste for human flesh, and will use magic to their advantage, making them a formidable force to reckon with without the right skill set and counter magic. As previously stated, while hunting, the Iloko will carry small bells, which they will ring to attract or paralyze their intended prey. These contain a powerful magic that only the most skilled of hunters with mystical protection can escape from when heard. Once their victim has been lured in, they will strike, swallowing them whole, then regurgitating their bones afterwards. The bells of the Iloko are said to be impossible to resist, and although there are certain amulets and fetishes which can be used to supposedly disarm or dispel the magic effect of them, it is still said that only professional hunters who possess these mystical powers can travel safely through the forest. That said, if you are lucky enough to avoid the Iloko's magic and confront the creature, it can be physically overpowered with raw strength and slain with ordinary weapons. Once dead, however, its corpse must be dismembered and each part of the body spread apart and buried in separate graves to prevent its resurrection. Cautionary tales warn men to never leave a wife alone in the forest, and for all ordinary people to remain in the village during the hours of darkness. For who knows when and where the Iloko will strike. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland radio show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.